Nicole Ibrahim, and I'm here to talk to you today about DSStores on Macs. You probably heard about Shellbags. That's the title of the talk. DSStores are definitely like Shellbags, but for a Mac. And we've been wanting Shellbags for Macs for a very long time. So I'm about to give that to you. So who am I? Nicole Ibrahim, that's me. Currently work for KPMG. I am a senior associate in the cyber response division, and absolutely love doing research. Worked on a lot of host-based forensics cases, and love programming as well. So why are we here? Is this important? Of course this is important for us. From a forensic standpoint, this artifact indicates folder accesses. They do not exist by default, with some exceptions. So their existence automatically indicates that a folder was accessed. So that's very important to keep in mind throughout this entire presentation. The main point here is they indicate folder accesses. It also, these artifacts also reveal how a folder was accessed as well. And it requires Finder GUI interaction. So these are not created by some random thing that the operating system is doing. This is actually a user using Finder and accessing a folder. So we'll talk about an introduction to DSStores. How many of you are familiar with DSStores? Nobody? One, two? We have two, three. So yeah, I hope that you're going to learn a lot from this presentation and really take that and apply it to your investigations going forward, because this is a very important artifact that we've been overlooking, very underutilized, and we really should start looking at it a lot more. So introduction. So DSStore is essentially desktop services store. That's the API that Finder is using to generate these DSStores. And it's associated, once again, with Finder GUI. And it's been around since Tiger. So 10.4, we have DSStores going back to Tiger. So it's been around for quite a while. So what these files essentially contain are the customized view settings, and that's why it's like Shellbags. So a user accesses a folder, and then Shellbags will store information about that Explorer window and all the details, so that way it can represent the window, the Explorer window, in the same way that it was prior. So that way the user doesn't have to keep going in and resetting all of the, all the customizations that they have made. So that's what these files contain. For them to be created, the user has to have write permissions to a folder. You cannot create these files if the user does not have write permissions to the folder, obviously. So these files can exist pretty much anywhere. So you might have seen them on Windows systems. This is a Mac artifact. Why is it on a Windows system? You may have seen it on external drives. So essentially, anything that, let's say, for example, we have a Windows SMB share, and we connect to it using our Mac computer, and we start accessing folders, and we have write access to those folders. DSStores will get created in those folders. Even though Windows doesn't do anything with them, Mac does. So Mac will store those files, so that way if the user goes back to that folder later, they can have their customized view settings displayed to them. So we know that a Mac user, if we find a DSStore on a Windows system, that was obviously from a Mac, because Windows don't create those files. And the same goes for attached USB drives. If you plug in a USB drive and you start accessing folders and you have write permissions using Finder, those will get created as well. So why are they created? What causes these files to get created? I also wanted to know, I think I jumped over it, but there are 3 files by default that that are automatically a part of a fresh install of macOS. And that is, one is in the root directory, and all the names are the same. So it's .ds_store. That will always be consistent. So one in the root directory, that's there by default on a fresh install. One in the applications folder, and one in the applications folder utilities directory. So those three are there on a fresh install of macOS, so you can expect to find those. That does not, their existence does not mean that a user accessed it necessarily, because it is a part of the operating system's fresh install. Any other file that you find anywhere else is automatically the result of user accessing a folder in some way. So they do not exist in folders by default, so keep that in mind. If you see them, that was created by something that was the result of the user doing within Finder. So why are they created? So what kind of circumstances would cause these to be created? Not all folder accesses in Finder will result in a DSStore file being created. So if you don't see a DSStore file in a folder, that doesn't mean the user didn't access it. And I will be talking about some of the ways that that would happen in upcoming slides. So if the user changes the view style, so there's different views in Finder. There's list view, there's columns view. I'm not going to go through all the views with you and what they look like and all that, but there's different kinds of views in Finder. So if a user changes a view in Finder, what happens is a DSStore will get created or updated, indicating that that folder has a new view, a different view. So something else is the scroll position. If I scroll down in a Finder window, that will also update a DSStore. Also changing the location or the size of the Finder window, that will update a DSStore or create a DSStore. If a user double clicks on a folder while in icon view, that will create an entry in a DSStore indicating that the folder was double clicked on by the user. And that is a direct access of a folder, not necessarily changing the views, and that will get its own code. So we also have list view. So list view allows you to expand out folders so that way you can see the contents of the folder. When you expand it out, that generates a record in a DSStore file, letting us know that that file was expanded. And then you can also right-click and do open in new tab for folders. So within a DSStore file, there can be multiple records because within a folder there can be multiple files and folders. And each file and folder, they can have multiple entries. And each entry indicates what kind of interaction the user had. So obviously, Finder's using this to restore the view, but we can take that and know how things were being accessed because we have data that shows us, you know, whether or not like the sort column was changed or something, or the scroll position, for example. The data is stored in a B-tree format. I will not be going through hex like I do with all my other presentations. I'm sure you're sad about that. No hex for anybody today, none. But it is documented. In 2013, the link at the bottom of this slide was posted. So it's quite old, and that is still relatively up to date. The only things that changed in that link are not up to date is all the codes that indicate what kind of change occurred. So a record, for our purposes, contains 4 components. It's the name, not the full path, the name of the file or folder that the record pertains to. There's also the record type. So the record type is a 4-letter character code that indicates what kind of record this is. And there are 42 currently discovered. So for me to go through and explain what each of them are and what it means would be difficult. I highly recommend you visit the link at the bottom of the slide. I think you can do a search for just like CPAN and DSStore, and it'll come up in Google. That has really detailed information about the record type codes and exactly what it means. But I will talk about a parser that does parse all of that for you and put a description of what each code means in the report itself. And then we have the data format. The format can be like how the data is stored. So it can be a Boolean value, or it can be a plist, or blob, or what have you, or short, or date UTC. So those are some examples of the kind of data that's contained. So there's also the record data. The record data is what Finder actually uses to display those customized settings to the user when they open up the folder the second time, or the third or fourth or fifth. So let's look at some Finder views that are quite interesting related to DSStores. Once again, not covering all of them, but these are the important ones that you need to be aware of and keep in mind. So columns view. I don't like this view. You're not going to like this view either, because columns view allows a user to navigate through folders all day long, and not a single DSStore will get updated or created or modified, nothing. You won't get a DSStore. So this is what columns view looks like. If you look at the top, it's highlighted or circled in red, squared in red. So I can literally navigate through every single folder. So that's why I said that just because a DSStore is not there, we cannot assume that the user did not access it, because obviously I'm accessing these folders, but there's no DSStore being modified or created associated with that. So icon view is very closely tied to DSStores, and the information in DSStores have a lot of icon view related information. That's also true for list view, which is going to come up next. So in icon view, so we can see here, for example, Jen's copy, that folder. It's not quite up to the right of the window. It's kind of like down. So Finder is storing the location of that icon for that folder in the DSStore itself. Now, just because it's in the DSStore, so this is something to keep in mind. And we will discuss this further when we start looking at the parse reports from a tool that I developed. But there will be an entry in a DSStore for Jen's folder, Jen's copy. That is an icon location record type, and it does not mean that I open that folder up. It's simply just recording data about the icon locations. It has nothing to do with me opening up the folder. And there are other record types that are like that also that do not indicate that I actually opened up the folder, so we can't use those to, look at folder accesses. So list view. List view, let's go, see if we can go. This is what list view looks like. So you can see the utilities folder is expanded. So when I expand out that folder, there's an entry created in the DSStore that says it was expanded. Originally, there's, by default, no entry for folders being expanded. So the first time I expand it, very first time, it gets an entry in DSStore. And it has a value of record data value of 1, which means that it is expanded. If I close it up, the record stays there, but it gets a value of 0. So if you see a value of 0, that means that it was expanded, but it's now not expanded. So let's look at parsing DSStores. How can we parse them? Because right now the data is not very friendly to look at it in even a hex editor or notepad. You can pull strings, but that doesn't give you any context to what's actually in these files. So I developed an open source and free tool called DSStore Parser. You can also download the compiled builds for this. There's one available for Windows and one available for Mac. I would recommend using those because you don't have to install any dependencies or libraries. So you can go ahead and download the latest release. And what it does is it outputs 3 reports when you parse. So one is the folder access report that I was talking about. So that one is where you would go to look at records for folders that were accessed by the user. The miscellaneous info report, the records in there do not necessarily mean that a user had opened the folder. So that's something that you need to keep in mind. It's just right now, no other tool is really segregating the record types or really giving really good context to what what the data actually means in a DSStore. So I would recommend go ahead and downloading that and running it against your Mac if you have one, and just see what kind of data it pulls out. But we'll look at the reports. The all report is essentially the other 2 reports combined. So the usage is very simple. We provide a source. If you're running this on a live system, you obviously give it a / as the source. And I would obviously recommend running this tool on a Mac because you can pull additional information that if you're parsing like extracted files on a Windows system, you're not going to get the right permissions. So this script actually pulls the permissions for the files too, which is going to be important down the road when we talk about some caveats associated with these files. And I would also recommend, it doesn't have image support right now, so what you have to do obviously is mount the image as read-only and then run it against the mount point. And it'll go through recursively, look for all the DSStore files and spit them out to a report. And these are the record types that I was talking about. So there's 42 in total that we discovered. And the folder access report lists all the kinds of record types that is added to a DSStore as a result of folder access. The miscellaneous, some examples there are like text clippings, so it actually contains some text clippings, comments, the logical size of files, and the modified time of files. Those do not indicate that a folder was necessarily open. That's something that Finder is doing, and I'm not sure what exactly, especially for the mod dates and the physical size and the logical size. I'm not sure why Finder gets that information and updates it in the DSStore. So those are essentially the code segregations and the categories for the data that we want to look at. So let's look at some interesting correlations. So obviously DSStores are about, mostly folder accesses from our standpoint. But there's some additional data in the record data, because you can open up like the folder access report and you can see a list of all the folders that had records in the DSStores, and you know just by looking at that folder access report that those folders were accessed. But we can take some additional data from the record data and do some correlation. So Windows bounds is essentially the bound of the Finder window from point to point, each corner, and it's stored in the record data. And that's relatively unique. I don't know of many people that never move their Finder window around. And I'm sure it's the same with Windows too, right? You're moving the Explorer window around all the time. So its location on the screen is changing. And those 4 points, the values for that, you can essentially treat it like a semi-hash to correlate different folder accesses. So let's look at the data. So these are 2 folders that have the exact same, this is what the parsed report looks like. There's some additional fields in there, like the timestamps of the source DSStore file itself, and the permissions of the DSStore file, and the name, the location of the DSStore file. So the generated path, that's not stored in the DSStore file, right? So what my tool does is it takes the location of the DSStore file, puts it in the generated path that appends the record that was parsed from the DSStore, and then we get the full path for the record. So let's look at the record data. That's the column all the way to the right. It has the exact same data. So I had opened up a Finder window, and I know that I accessed these around the same time because it's my system. But I opened up a Finder window. The Finder window was a certain size and a certain location, displayed somewhere on the screen. And then with that open, so opened up my images, and then double-clicked on the 2017 images folder. And what happens when you double-click an icon view, it takes those Windows bounds and it applies it to any folder that you access. So if we take those Windows bounds, and here's another example, kind of put those together, this was me creating, accessing folders related to knowledge C, because I was parsing some knowledge C data. Now, I don't know if you can see it, but the first 3 files are actually in the users directory for Nico. The last 3 files are in the users directory for Nikki. So how am I managing to access folders in another user's, users directory? That's because I gave myself permissions to the development folder. So that's why there's 2 different usernames there. And if we were to look at the data that's not being shown for permissions, in the permissions column, you would actually be able to see that the same user owns the DSStore where those records are stored. So that would be the user ID for Nico. So I just correlated using Windows bounds because they're all the exact same. You know, it was at a certain very specific position on the screen. I correlated all these folder accesses to, you know, like a single session. I mean, I can't really use session, but, you know, a time frame or an event. So you can see the folders that were being accessed there. Next is scroll positions. So there are various codes that allow or that store scroll positions. So the scroll position, you know, it can be vertical or horizontal, and that lets Finder know at what point in the Finder window or what place in the Finder window you were last viewing. So that information can be important. Maybe you want to know, like, well, what section in the folder was the user actually looking at? So you can see the scroll list highlighted, and obviously the data looks different here because this is a different code. These are different codes, so each code has different kinds of data in it. Trash putbacks are very interesting. So if you send a file to the trash, what happens is in the DSStore in the trash, 2 record entries are created for a single file. One is the trash putback name, the other is the trash putback location. So those are the original name and location of a file that was sent to the trash. Now what happened, this is stored so that if you want to restore it back, Finder knows where to put it, right? So if you restore it, say I sent a file to the file that was on the desktop to the trash, and then I restored it back to the desktop, but then I moved it somewhere else, those records, the original file name and location, will actually follow that file no matter where you move it. So you can, if you see like trash putbacks in any other DSStore other than the trash's DSStore, you know that that file was sent to the trash. So these are some examples. The very first one that's highlighted is, there's 2 entries for it, obviously. You can see all the way to the right, the record data shows that the original location was the desktop, and the original name is still the same. That actually exists right now in the trash. And then if we go down to the third from the bottom, there's the knowledge or no-see rename test. And if you look at the record data for that, the original name was no-see. And if you look at the location for that file, it is in a different location. So this is historical information that was retained within DSStores and will follow that file around no matter where you move it. And it does not touch the record data. So selected indexes. This was actually something that was one of my favorite things about DSStores, and they took it away in Sierra. So that was a sad day for me, a very, very sad day. So in icon view, when you click on files and folders, previously, prior to Sierra, it would get a selected index. That selected index lets me know as an investigator or somebody conducting analysis that the user had clicked on that file. So if we look here, you can see that there's selected indexes. The first one that's highlighted has a selected index of 2, and the one below it has a selected index of 1. So this makes sense because the one with the selected index of 1 is a zip file. The one with the selected index of 2 is the extracted zip file. So what I did was I double-clicked on the zip file, Mac automatically extracted it, and then I double-clicked on the folder that was extracted and opened it up, and it got a selected index of 2. The one all the way at the bottom, that has a selected index of 27. So I know in this folder that the user clicked on items 27 times. And you can see that all the others, almost all the others have a selected index. Some have a selected index of null, and that's because the user did not click on it while in icon view. But like I said, this is no longer available as of Sierra. So, but obviously we work on old Mac cases all the time, so this can still apply. So let's look at some of the caveats associated with DSStores. So DSStores are highly portable. They're highly portable. So the problem is that I can zip up a folder and copy that folder to another computer, and the DSStore will actually be zipped up with the folder. Then I can extract it out. So how can we determine what was, let's say, natively created by Finder user interaction on the system versus coming from some other place? And that's why it's important to parse or run the parser on a Mac, because we can get the information that we need to validate whether or not this is an external, like a DSStore from somewhere else, or was it natively created by the user interacting with Finder. So what you want to look for is the permissions. By default, the permissions only allow the owner of the file read and write access. Everybody else gets read. So if we have anything other than that, then that is an indicator of a DSStore file not originating from that system and it came from somewhere else. The exception to that are those 3 files that I mentioned that exist by default on a fresh install of macOS, the one in the root folder, the one in the applications directory, and the one in the utilities directory. So also, in addition to the permissions, we need to see the extended attributes. The extended attributes for DSStores created by Finder and not the result of somebody copying it will have an extended attribute of com.apple.finderinfo. If it does not have this, then that is an indicator that it is likely from somewhere else. So, you know, if we find a so the importance of that is if we parse DSStores, but we don't know if they're native to the file system or not, you know, we may accuse the user of accessing something that they didn't access, right? Because that was never their file. Like, I can download DMGs and then copy, you know, like when I install applications, copy that to the applications folder, and there will be DSStores in the folder that I copied over. I never accessed those folders. That DSStore came from somewhere else. So that's very important to keep in mind. So we don't have any full paths. But luckily for us, the DSStore parser does generate the full path for us using the DSStore location in addition to the record name. And we don't have any stored timestamps. That was not one of the 4 components. So unfortunately, we can parse the records in the DSStore, but we can't tell when something happened. We can't tell when the folder was accessed. So we, unlike with Shellbags, we do get timestamps. We don't get timestamps here. The best we have is the created and modified time to give us a time range. So the record data is also volatile. So if I rename an entry, or I rename a folder, automatically it purges that old entry and adds a new one back with the new file name. It'll retain all the other data, but it updates the record name. Now, if I delete a folder, and what happens is the records for that folder get purged from that file also. So we cannot recover that. I tried carving, you know, slack space and free space in the, the DSStore file itself to see if there was any, you know, slack between the records where I could pull some data, but there was nothing there. But we have solutions for this. We can try to carve for DSStores on the disk. Also, they're backed up in local snapshots. So that's great. And also check time machine backups. So we do have some solutions to get some older data back that was purged from the DSStore. So in conclusion, the main point of this talk is folder accesses. When you think DSStore, think folder accesses. These indicate, when we look at the parse report from my tool, we can look at the folder access report. We can see what the user accessed. It's there in a nice list, easy to use. So you can take that and use that as a part of your, you know, investigations, analysis for an additional source of information for, you know, folder accesses. They provide how the user interacted with the, with Finder or with the folder while it was opened. Where was the scroll position? Did they click on any of the icons? A lot of different data that obviously I can't cover because the time frame is quite limited, but you can also get the original file names and locations of files that were sent to the trash and then restored. So that's great information also. And we do have some caveats with this, but we can do some workarounds for those caveats. So that's what I have for you.
Thank you very much, Nicole.
No problem. Thanks.